and just use the agile terminology, and just working with clients is exposes a lot of challenges doing software development. So we attend this conference every year we go in seeking answers to some of the challenges related to agile software development, and we commit ourselves ahead of the conference that we're going to come back and bring top 10 highlights for our clients and our ecosystem in Dallas, Austin, and Houston. And that keeps us focused when we attend the conference. We'll tell you more details in a few minutes. Keeps us very focused in making sure we don't convert that to a boondoggle. We're actually attending the sessions, we're listening stuff, we're picking sessions based on what's actually going to be a useful topic that we could possibly take away as a top 10 highlight. So both Vinayak and I get a lot more bang for the buck in attending the conference because we commit ourselves ahead of time. And we get a lot more out of the conference as we come back and we share top 10 highlights. So that's what we do. And that's what we do today. It happens to be 12. We never can get to 10. One time we were 16, then we got down to 14. For last 2 years we've been on 12. So one day we'll make it actually 10. But so that said, let's get started. So this is I'll go through. So here's how the process is going to work. I'll go through a bit of an overview of the conference first, just a few pages, and then Vinayak and I will alternate. Vinayak will go through his top 10 takeaway, number 1. I'll go through number 2. He gets number 3, and so on till we get to number 12. And we'll wrap up with a few straggling takeaways. And you guys, so let's keep this conversational. We are practitioners of software development, as are all of you guys. You live and breathe the challenge of software development. It keeps us all in business and keeps our minds alive. So ask any questions along the way. It's not supposed to be a lecture. We are no experts. We just are relaying and being somewhat of a curators of the content that was covered in this conference. This is our take of highlights. So this was just last week, so it's fresh off the press. This is the annual conference, had a record number of attendees, 2,300 or so. They always have these 4 special tracks and then 3 keynotes on Monday morning, Wednesday, and Friday. All keynotes excellent. We'll cover the content of these in our top 10 takeaways. And the main thing to remember, there were 20 tracks. There were 2 new tracks. One track this year, you'll see a lot of it, is this track on Agile data and metrics. So you'll see, at least in my main takeaways, a lot of that, because that was a new track this year, because the importance of data and metrics in Agile. The old school way of Agile was, let's just start building software. Let's not worry about any metrics. That was the old Agile is very empirical, data driven. So having a track this year was overdue. There was another new track here, Agile Midway. I have no idea why they called it Agile Midway, but this was essentially on Friday morning. Interesting sessions on a variety of topics, including improv, as how it applies to Agile and all that. But and I don't know why they got the term Midway, but regardless. So there were 20 tracks. So at any given time slot in the day, this was a full week, 4.5 days, Monday through Friday, noon time. There were 19 sessions running. So Vinayak and I had to make a choice which of these 19 sessions to attend. That's very hard. In any given time slots, there were always at least 3 good sessions that we could go to. It's very hard to make a choice. Sometimes you go to a session thinking a lot about, given the topic, the way it is described in the write-up, that it's going to be promising, and you walk in and after halfway or 20 minutes into it, turns out to be just not enough value, another way around. So it's hard, but we did, between the 2 of us, we attended probably about 30 sessions, between 15 and 20 each, roughly, a little over 30 minutes. So we have a 10% kind of a hit rate. So we attended, of the 270 or 280 sessions that were there, we attended about 30, 35 of them. So we have 10% sample, essentially, that we are sharing. But then we also got inputs from the casual conversations and other sessions along the way. So we hope that what we share here is reasonably representative of the highlights of the actual conference. So before I go any further, any of you who were at the conference this year? Okay, but that's safe. Yeah. So otherwise, you have to be careful. People think you're making up stuff. No. But Florence was at the conference. Keep us honest. So these are indeed genuinely from the conference. So with that said, I won't go through these will just take turns. So next, over to you to talk about the topic number 1.
Hi. Do you hear a bit of echo? Or is it only me? Because I landed, last night my flight got delayed and I landed at past midnight and slept at 1:30. And, thanks to some of my friends, I've had a couple of drinks. So are you hearing the echo or is it just me who's hearing the echo?
It is like there is echo.
Okay, so there's a, Hemant, can you switch off your mic?
Yeah, let me try that.
Yeah, so this is a hard act going to be for us to keep up, Every time I speak, you have to switch it off. Every time you speak, I have to switch it off. And I won't know when you want me to speak, right? So, the way we would do it is when I advance the slide, okay, when I advance the slide and if I reach your slide, that's when you should switch it on. Okay? Alright. So with that understanding, okay, I'm sober. Alright, so continuous delivery, continuous deployment, continuous testing, continuous integration. We have heard of these things, right? But what's new in this Agile conference? Continuous analytics and insights. You're continually getting analytics and insights of the way your customers are behaving. So continuous analytics and you're responding to that, continuous governance. So that's new. So that's what I learned from Junie Mukherjee and Nicola Paez. Junie is from CloudBees, the people behind Jenkins. So talk a little bit more about that. So the pipeline that we always knew of was a pipeline starting from check-in to go live, right? You check in your software, it goes live. That's the pipeline we always talk about. But there's a longer pipeline from feature, lead time, from inception to cache. From the time you start building to cache. And today, we're going to see how we build a pipeline from concept to cache. At least, I'm going to talk about it. For me also, it's just 1 week old knowledge. So, with a word of caution, so the pipeline was spanning every step from check-in to go live. So as of today, what we're going to talk about is the new way of thinking of the pipeline, which does continuous everything from concept to cache. So I would like to draw your attention to concept to cache, average age and MTTR. So these are some of the metrics, and you're not only tracking the average age of the MTTR, mean time to recovery, but also you're seeing how much money, how many people are actually signing up for this, if it's an e-commerce site. So look at this pipeline. So this pipeline starts, this is familiar, component building, component unit testing, static analysis, subsystem deploy, functional contract, all that. But this is blue-green, so you have, parallelly you have 2 versions coexisting at the same time, version N and version N-1. And there's a manual intervention, you can flip the switch between your A and B. So we'll talk a little bit about A/B testing today. And then you look at business KPIs. So our impression so far was you only look at whether it passes the test as the test case written by your QA. But it's not enough. You also look at your business KPIs. That's a part of your pipeline. That's what we're talking about. And then there are business toggles. So based on your business priorities, you toggle on or off a particular feature, and then you'll keep either of these, either A active or B active, depending on what is giving you the customer behavior that is desired by you. So that's then she talked about some 12 factors. I would not label through all 12 of them, it is too much. So one code base, Has someone heard of 12 factor for microservices? 12 factor microservices? Anyone? Okay, so if there's no one who's heard of it, then I will not take too much time. So it's a panel here, 12 factor for pipelines. So one code base, many deploys, strictly separate build, release, and run stages, and storing the config in the environment. So you have a separate config server, and backing services are also attached resources, maybe S3, right? S3 if it's in it. And then concurrency and disposability, these two are, so concurrency is like a model where producer is aware of all the consumers. So it is a model which is where a producer service is actually talking to the consumer service. And disposability is where the producer is just waiting for subscribers, and it's a pops-up model where producer doesn't know who are the subscribers. So subscribers will subscribe, and it's a producer-driven contract, and you can kill any of the producers without impacting the consumers. So it's an end-to-end testing is required only for consumers in this case, whereas in case of concurrency, you require end-to-end testing both for producers and consumers. Jenkins X. So you must try Jenkins X. So I'm going to go back and try. I have not tried it yet. So the latest is that if you remember some years back, it used to get a CD which you could install software, right? Now, when it comes to distributed applications, the only way you can make it available to your end users is by having a SaaS model. You can't have a cloud-based system which sweet sounds like. All right. So, is that an indication you're switched on? Yeah. So, am I hearing the echo, or are you also hearing it? Okay. So, Jenkins X, it's like you have everything behind that goes below Kubernetes has got commoditized, whether it is a private cloud which is using OpenStack or Cloud Foundry, or it's a public cloud using AWS or Google Cloud or Azure, whatever. So you don't bother what is below Kubernetes. What is above Kubernetes is all you bother about it. It has become deployable by shrink wrapping and packaging it using what is known as Helm. So if you look up Helm, that is a way to package a distributed application and give it to your customers, but how do you get paid? Harbor. So Harbor is a marketplace which cuts across technologies. So it doesn't have any specific preference like Google or Apple. Apple only takes iOS or Apple products, whereas Google will take Android will take Android. Whereas Harbor is a marketplace where you can put up any distributed application which is packaged using Helm and get paid using cryptocurrency. So that's your pipeline managed by Jenkins X, concept to cache. So that is the future. I have not seen any of this. I have just heard about it last week, so take it with a spoonful of salt. But I'm going to try it out. Thank you. So Hemant, over to you.
Okay. All right. So let's start with my number 2 takeaway for us. So the number 2 takeaway for us was this. I told you there's a full track this year on data and analytics on Agile. So this person, Larry Macaron, who I credited all this information, he had a session called Agile Quantified, and he's been presenting at this conference, and I've attended his sessions before. So this is a robust and rigorous exercise of looking through data of 10,000 Agile teams. 10,000, so it's a large number. On Rally, one of the prominent Agile project management tools. So, and he was associated with CMU's Software Engineering Institute. So he has done, from what I can tell, as rigorous as it gets, statistically rigorous analysis, and teased out certain key findings based on the 10,000 data points of Agile teams. So I'll share with you in the next few minutes those key findings that are relevant and actionable if you're running Agile teams. They're helpful. but with a few caveats. First thing, the performance, he's using a criteria, he came up with this, and I'll cover this more in one of my takeaways, a balanced scorecard of sorts with 4 criteria: productivity, predictability, responsiveness, and quality for agile teams. And we'll talk more about it separately. But for next few minutes, for this takeaway, just assume this makes sense. There are 4 criteria for any agile teams, and you can add them all together for a composite score, or you can look at each individual one: the productivity of a team, predictability of a team, the quality of the output of the team, or the responsiveness of the team. So with those criteria, and like I said, I felt it was a statistically rigorous work, so worth paying attention to. It's not easy to just kind of write it off. So that said, and I'm going to skip through these details. So two caveats. Make sure that one important thing in Agile is that there's no such thing as best practices. So whatever these findings are, these are practices you have to apply them in context. The good practices in context. So whether team size, whether it is estimation approach, whatever it is, they're good in certain situations. So make sure you account for your context when you apply these findings. Second is these are correlation. So it doesn't mean causality. So just keep that in mind. With that said, let's go through the main highlights that he shared. So first one was team size. So the magic number historically has been 2 pizza teams, 7 plus minus 2. You guys have all heard in Agile 7 plus minus 2 pizza teams. But the research finding, according to this and then other data, is the performance is pretty close when you look at a composite score, which is all those 4 criteria that I mentioned. That even 9 to 15% team, if it reduces your dependencies across teams, if that allows you, so therefore having a bigger team allows you to be less dependent on other teams and bring the dependencies within one larger team, that's actually not a bad thing. That's probably a good thing. So don't get too stuck on 7 plus minus 2. So that's important finding from this robust data. Second is the length of sprint or iteration. This is an interesting one. That longer, so I took 2 main criteria where there is a signal. So I'm only using those data points where there is a statistically significant indication of some sort worth acting on. So in this case, the longer the iteration, the higher the quality. So if you see here, 4-week iterations seems to correlate with higher quality. And the shorter iterations, 1 week long, correlates with higher productivity and also responsiveness. I'm not showing responsiveness chart here. But so overall, if you look at the balance for performance, 2-week iteration seems to stand out as pretty balanced for performance. So if you're building something new, a new product where you need responsiveness, 1-week iteration seems pretty intuitive, it's better, you forego quality. But if you're an enterprise software company building something complex and quality is important, longer iterations are better. So that's good to have robust data to help inform that decision. Next data point which was useful was typical question of ratio of developers to testers. So the horizontal scale here is having no developers, 0, having roughly 3 developers to 1 tester, so 0.3 ratio, 2 developers to 1 QA, that's that ratio, and then roughly 1:1. So what's better? So of course, as you see the chart here, if you have higher number of 1:1, of course you get better quality. So that's pretty intuitive. The higher number of developer or tester, 1:1 ratio gets to better quality. But also impacts generally to productivity. You end up obviously having less productivity as a team. The more counterintuitive finding is the teams that self-identify themselves with 0 testers. Here, they seem to have pretty decent quality and high productivity, and the explanation potentially is that when you have no testers in the team, the developers take ownership of quality, so that ends up being high quality output. So somewhat useful in that sense. But in general, if you were to think of this as actions, so 2:1 or 3:1 is a pretty common kind of a mix for dev to QA ratio. Next one is estimation process. I'll talk a lot more about that in one of my next takeaways. But for a balanced score, there are 4 ways teams need to do estimates. So when we describe, so one is what they call lightweight scrum. Lightweight scrum is you're just using story points. Just using story points, no task hours, they're calling that a lightweight estimation process, lightweight Scrum. Full Scrum technique of estimation is that you're using story points and breaking down story into task hours and then estimating tasks in hours. That's the full Scrum estimation technique. No estimates is of course not doing any of those. And hourly is you're only doing task hours estimate. So what looks like is lightweight Scrum, where you're using just story points, seem to be the most highest performance when you look at the composite performance of all criteria: productivity, responsiveness, throughput, and quality.
Question for you.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
When I look at the scale, it looks like the difference between the first and second column is negligible. Are we talking,
This is the challenge with this presentation. That's a very good question. I kept asking that to Larry when he was presenting it, that the way these charts are drawn in percentile, so that visually speaking, you're right, it looks very close, those parts, right? But the way he's analyzing the data, these are not my conclusions on the right, these are his conclusions. So he's looking at detailed data and drawing his conclusions based on statistical significance and all those considerations. Charts visually, because the scale and all that, look what they look. So I'm going by it, but your point is very valid, sir. Yeah. And you'll see same observation in some of the other charts.
Is that full true for his statement on 200% better quality?
Yeah,
So you
absolutely.
look at those two, like I would never guess that there's.
But the quality, yeah, good point. So
Like, how do you measure that?
yes, so quality metric that we defined here, he has defined a quality metric. So quality metric in his criteria is defect density. So he is very rigorous, and that's why I kept first preamble. This is a rigorous statistical data. This guy has done a PhD in this topic. So I'm and he's been presenting it for the last 5 years actually. This data. So I tend to go agree or buy this general conclusions. This is not fluffy stuff, but apply in context. Doesn't it?
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. I'm highly skeptical of data like that. Being an ex-management consultant, the charts can be very misleading. But I think this is good data. Okay, ratio test we covered, estimation process we covered. Okay, this is an interesting one, relevant for our co-located versus distributed teams. So here the interesting finding is that teams distributed in the same time zone. So this is like a work from home situation, of course, very commonly here. Seems to be the most productive, 25% more productive. And the explanation he gave is that look, these people tend to have more focus. They're not distracted by stuff going on. They tend to get stuff done. That's interesting finding to see in the same time zone. They're most productive. Otherwise, if you see back to the point you're making, if you look at these charts, there doesn't seem to be that much difference. Whether you are a widely distributed team like our teams tend to be in India and Silicon Valley and Texas, and a single open working space right here locally, there's not a huge difference visually speaking. You could be very distributed, you could be completely local, not a huge difference. So, interesting finding. Again, rigorous data backs this up. Okay, and the final one is stable and dedicated teams. So they came up with a metric of team stability. I won't go into the detail. So on the right, the more right you go, the more stable and dedicated teams are to a project. So stable teams obviously get 60% better productivity and 40% higher predictability, as you see here. But when he's scrubbed through the data, the reality when you see through the rally data of 10,000 teams, it just does seem like there is a constant churn of 1 out of 4 team members change every 3 months or so. So that's the reality of teams. But strive for stable, dedicated teams gives you better predictability and productivity. So that's it from Dr. Vinayak for next takeaway.
So, how many of you have implemented or have plans? How many of you have plans to implement microservices? Okay, some of you do have. So, monoliths are not bad. So, when microservices communicate with each other, they use RESTful API, which works over HTTPS. So, it is like 2 programs talking to each other over the internet. Even if it is intranet, and even if you have a fiber optic cable, 2 programs that are, or 2 functions that are residing in the same computer, in the same memory, they're 45 times as fast as those two which are communicating over wire. So that's why, that's one reason why monoliths are not bad. Monoliths can work faster. The second reason is, you can make it easy to find dependent codes. So there is, you can just comment on the particular function and see which are the classes which stop compiling. You can easily find out what are the dependent functions. You can easily track and monitor because, imagine having one server and you have a log, and imagine having 10 logs from 10 servers with parallel timelines running, 10 timelines running. And it's very hard to make out what happens because of what in that. But if it's one single timeline, logging is so much easier for tracking and monitoring. Also, adding new features is relatively easier. Whereas microservices also have their advantages. You don't end up with a ball of mud, right? You keep things apart. You deploy changes for just one thing. So, you want to change one small thing, you don't have to wait for a month or 2 months for the release to go out. You just make that one small change and it goes out the next day. And you can deal with technical debt because then in that case refactoring becomes easier. Now let's see some of the prerequisites. One of the things that,
What's the 45 times or
45 times. 45. I'm saying if you're communicating at the speed of light within the same CPU. So prerequisites. So if you're implementing microservices and if you don't have DevOps culture, that's something which one is one should not attempt trying to implement microservices without having automation, DevOps culture, automation. So you can't. I can't imagine going to AWS console and typing command line interface commands and one by one going through a Word document which miss a few hundred steps what I'm supposed to do. So that's strict no-no. Sorry. So you have to use tools like Structure 101 Studio. So make a note of this in case you don't used it before. So Structure 101 Studio for Java is a good tool that you should be using to view and fix programmatic complexity defects. And I talk a little bit about how refactor code can be isolated and then extracted and deployed. So go to the next slide. So this is your monolith, which typically used to have a framework-based system. Like you have your front end, middleware, and back end. You have Angular code, you have Java code, and you have Hibernate code, sitting in horizontal layers. So if you want to move to microservices, stay in your monolith, but refactor your monolith to separate out functionality by functionality, such as sign up, search, and order. So everything front end, middleware, back end for sign up stays here, similarly for search and similarly for order. So refactor. So do a gradual move. You don't have to jump from monolith to microservices. So you don't want to do a virtual rewrite. So what you want to do is first get a monolith in order and then peel out microservices one by one. The other way is to isolate code by bounded context. So domain-driven design. How many of you have heard of domain-driven design? So Eric Evans, domain-driven design. Few of you have heard. So you divide your code by bounded context. So shipping consists of packaging and delivery. So all classes related to packaging and delivery go here. Similarly for sales, similarly for pricing and inventory and all that. So based on the bounded context, you separate out the concerns and then you take the code out and maybe within a so you would probably package it in separate packages. The other way to do it is by dependency inversion. So dependency inversion, let's see the concept. The concept is easy. You throw the switch and the light glows. So there is a direct dependency, right? So there is a community. You can't separate these things. So if you have to isolate, you'll have communication across internet or across. So you don't want to have. So you'll have to. You can't make. You have to co-locate these two. Now, let's say if you have to separate these two out, what you will do is dependency inversion. So you write an interface, which is an I button interface, and then there is a client. So the client registers with the I button interface. It says that, hey, I am a client. So every time there is an event such as switch on happening, inform me. Or if switch off happens, inform me. And then that is how you that is how you are going to separate out concerns here by doing dependency inversion. So that's a third way of isolating code. So the idea here is take your monolith, spend enough time on monolith to refactor the monolith before you jump to microservices. And then finally you can extract those in formal modules. So it could be in jar files in Java or Ruby gems or package index in Python or NuGets in Microsoft. Yeah, so then you're ready to move to microservices. So don't think of it's a journey. So don't jump from monoliths to microservices. That's the advice we got. What do you think?
The next topic takeaway is difficult topic of estimation. So whenever you have a software project, we all run into challenge. In our case, particularly working with clients, they have a project, you've got to estimate time and cost. So this is a session by Adam Uret and Troy. If you attended our takeaways from last year, we had similar takeaway. This is just the next rev of it. But it was big enough this year again that I decided to include it again this year. So the challenge, what teams typically do when you have a project is break it down into stories, and then the development team goes through estimating using what we call in the metric lightweight scrum or full scrum task hours or the story point. Either way, they go through what I would call a bottom-up estimation exercise, and it takes a lot of time and a lot of effort, and it's a long-drawn process. So the advice is actually different. The takeaway here is based on the work done by these guys and practice, that while there's indeed a value of the estimation exercise, the teams sit together and they go through the debate around is this a 5-story point story versus a 13-story point story, and then they ask each other questions. Clearly, there's a value of that. You clarify your understanding of the complexity, and the team ends up with a better collective understanding of the scope of work. So there is value, but the estimate that they actually come up with actually is very useless. That's what data says. So a better way, therefore, when you're estimating and needing to give, if your executive says, look, tell me how long this project will take, better way to do that is use statistical techniques for estimation. So that's what I'll go through in this takeaway. Rather than have the developers and QA people team talk, understand, reach a mutual understanding, but use this technique to come up with a reliable estimate. So, and I forgot to mention this in the beginning, in most of these cases when we are sharing our takeaways 1 through 12, in most cases we are striving to give you links to wherever and credit the content. This is none of this content is ours. This is from speakers, respective speakers who presented, and we are being honest to credit them, and wherever they offer the links to get to this, we are offering that link. So when you guys get this document, you'll have all these links that you can go to. So in this case, the spreadsheet, so Troy has made this spreadsheet available, which I think is very effective. So let me go through this, how to do that. So one key part before I get to the spreadsheet is when a developer estimates a story point, being a 1-story point, for example, but they're thinking is I got this much work in this step, and I got this much work in this step, so this is a 1-point story. A different story, a developer estimates that, I got this much work in flow here, this much work in flow here, this is a 13-point story. But in reality, when they start actually developing hands-on keyboard, both these stories take 20 minutes because of the wait time, dependencies and wait time. that team members have with other team members that overwhelms the actual duty cycle of the hands on keyboard. So no point taking the developer estimate and thinking that's the actual estimate, because that's not how it works in real life. It's better so the statistical estimate accounts for these realities, dependencies and wait times that are reality of software development work. So that's important to note. Okay, so this is a way to think about if you have a fast, high performance developer, he's still not going to get output if he's stuck behind someone else. So keep this in mind. Okay, so what you do is you go to that link, use the simple spreadsheet. What the spreadsheet does is,
Can you go back a slide real quick? Sorry, someone's taking a picture.
oh, okay. Yeah, this time this is the Lamborghini. Yeah? So, all right. So what you do is this spreadsheet is public domain. You can access it, and it is not a work behind it. So what the spreadsheet is doing is using Monte Carlo simulation. Don't worry about how it is done. I had to read it up before this presentation just to know enough. And it is using a probability distribution curve, not normal. I'm sure most of you are familiar. It's called Weibull distribution, which has a long tail, more representative of software development work. So it uses that probability distribution and Monte Carlo simulation behind the scenes. You don't have to worry about it. All you have to do is give your start date of your project. You should have a range of stories, scope of work. So your team has estimated between 20 and 30 stories. That's estimate. Then you put input. These are these cells, dark colored are the ones where you provide input. Then you input what is called a split ratio, which is if you know from experience in your history of your team's work that a typical story as it progresses ends up splitting into two stories. Just look at some empirical data and come with the conclusion. In this example, they're using 1:1, which is fine to use that for now. And then all you need to do is look at some of your real data for recent history. This is important. Take real data from recent history of your same team's work. So they've been delivering between 1 and 5, say story points, stories, whatever that units you're using consistently throughout per week. Then you use between 1 and 5 stories and that's your input. That's all. Once you do that, it will produce a probability distribution of your project completion. You said you're going to have 20 to 30 stories, you're going to start with a particular day. It tells you that 85 to 90% confidence that will take you 11 weeks. If you want more confidence, few more weeks. But you can just go by that, and that's a must. So you're almost certain in this range with the confidence interval that this is a good estimate based on this data. And this is a much better way to do it. And all you need in this case, and this is on the right is just illustrating the Weibull distribution curve. This is what it looks like with the shape 1.5. If you are statistics geeks, then that's important. 1.5 is the shape of this curve. So, important thing in the data point is, this is another important chart, all you need is the diminishing value of additional data points from your recent history. All you need is 10 to 12 data points. That gives you just enough information about your teams. If you in fact don't take even more data, if you go back too far in history, that data is probably not representative of your team anymore. So you're going to actually add noise to it. So just take recent data, 10 to 12 samples, input into the spreadsheet. You have a scope of stories already, good enough, and that gives you a reasonably good estimate. And that's a much better way. So net of the forecast, to use this forecasting tool using historical velocity of throughput data, and use most recent 10 to 12 samples. You don't need any more than that. And stale data, like I just said, erodes the context. So the old context in which the old data was actually not relevant. So don't try to overdo the old context anyways. So I thought this was very actionable and useful way for teams to go about estimation. Okay.
So how many of you have had arguments with your colleagues that my project is more innovative than your project? All of us think, so how do we measure innovation? So the next topic we are going to talk about is innovation accounting. So the usual way this kind of argument gets resolved is, if data is not the way we do it, right? It's HIPPO. Anyone? Nico? Yeah. Highest paid person's opinion. So it's basically, whoever is the boss in the room says, okay, this is the way this project goes. That's the way. Or squeaky wheel. Squeaky wheel is the person who makes the maximum noise gets this way. Or FIFO, first in first out. Yeah, my project was first, I go first. So this is a wide rational way of deciding investments in innovation. So innovation accounting is a way of assigning a number which is giving something like a profitability or a probable return on investment, which is a hard thing to do, but that is the concept behind innovation accounting. So you should look up David Bennett. So David Bennett and Eric Ries. So they talk a lot about innovation accounting. So that's the way companies that are learning decide the value of the innovation and learning that they have. So one mistake we often make in this is we look at the sunk costs. That I have spent $1 million on this project, now how can I let it go? Now, sunk costs don't mean anything. So you have to look at what are the metrics saying. So what is pivot? Pivot is something after having spent some money, you have learned that your baby is ugly. You can't do it anymore. So you have to pivot. So very few people have the willingness to accept the fact and actually do the pivot. So you have to ignore some costs and the best way to do it. So someone has said in the conference, I don't know who said it, that if you have to measure anything, measure cost of delay. That's one metric which is very important. So what is cost of delay? Cost of delay is the business value that the user will derive plus how important it is in terms of time criticality plus risk reduction or opportunity enablement value. What you can say is the loss of profit. So add all these and that will give you cost of delay. And weighted shortest job first is a metric based on cost of delay. So you compare cost of delay with job size, you put job size in the denominator and you get weighted shortest job first. Too much work, right? So what we do instead is, do a simple exercise, put your team in a room and ask them to draw ships and anchors. The ship says, the size of the ship shows how big, what is the value, and the size of the anchor shows what is the cost, right? And see where you have a big ship and a small anchor, go for that first, that is the most innovative project. And if you see a small ship and a big anchor, do it. So, yes, of course, I have nothing against what Drew Allen said there, but it's too much work. How do you find these things? It's very theoretical, right? Business value. How do you find that? Don't put the dollar amount there, right? At least I can think of really, given my time constraints, these calculations are possible. The other hard part is, okay, we'll come to that later. This is a model innovation process where you have a hypothesis. Where you have a hypothesis and then you build a minimum viable product and then you have a decision point whether you decide to persevere. So continue until the WSJF determines otherwise. Pivot is to stop the work and go back to start with a new hypothesis. So the prerequisites for business agility are all this. So I'll be sharing. I don't want to go through all this business agility stuff. So this is how the modern innovation process looks like. Minimum viable product, the lean startup model. Now the hard part is getting. So you can't go with discounted cash flow, ROI, revenue. These are all lagging indicators. So it's only after the effect. So you don't know what the ROI is going to be. You don't know what the. So you need to have leading indicators. bad news is that leading indicators, there is no standard for leading indicators, it depends. It depends on what you are trying to accomplish. So, as you can see in this diagram here, your leading indicator could be, in this case, average cost. So, it's a call center, and you're moving from call center to a website. So, you can see that the volume of call center calls is going down, the blue line, average call center volume. Then the red line, average calls for flights scheduled, so it's the airline call center. As the number of visits to the websites is website and the number of flight schedule queries are going up, right? So based on such, these are leading indicators. This show. So you have the data today, and you know what is going to be the revenue generated by people actually booking flights on that. So use these leading indicators instead of, there's no way you can use lagging indicators, and that is what will determine the value of the innovation. So innovation accounting. Over.
The next takeaway was this topic of value over cost. So, what we observed in was in session by Chris Sims in this case, most teams tend to spend most of their time worrying about the cost estimate, and I covered and gave you advice on using statistical probabilistic approach to cost estimation. But most teams spend very little time doing diligence on the value of a story. So if you have 20 stories in a project, the scope of the project, they'll spend a lot of time estimating the effort needed to do each story, whether it's hours or story points in whatever units they're using. But they gloss over, they will prioritize, but the value that each story brings, that seems to doesn't get attended. So this was the topic of how to correct for that incongruity between value versus cost. Okay, so what really a simple technique, and I've been seeking this kind of an answer because this is a common challenge. If you're in software development, you find that the marketing team or the business team gives you a project and a scope, but they don't put enough diligence on justifying why that scope is or those stories are important, what's the real business value of each story for that matter. But on the other hand, the engineering team is held accountable to a detailed estimate, and then they have to deliver on the estimate and all that. They go through the complexity of estimation and process and all that. So a better process, a takeaway is a very simple technique. So you use Fibonacci series, those cards, to do the cost estimate of stories, using story points of 0, 1, 2, 3, 5, 8, 13 and all that. So just like a team uses planning poker exercise to do the cost estimate or effort estimate or complexity estimate, use a very similar exercise for the value estimate. But in this case, in the room, you have all the business stakeholders facilitated by the product owner. The product owner is sitting there, and business stakeholders, whether it's CEO, whether it's product manager, whether it's a sales guy, who are the stakeholder, maybe even a customer. Stakeholders are sitting in the room, and you go story by story in the scope, and you have them first prioritize, force rank the stories, and then give them the story point cards, and have them now put them in the buckets of what's the 13 point versus the 8 point versus 5 point value. Now they're doing it by value. And doing that exercise really forces them to debate and discuss. If a salesperson says, look, I need this feature, and this is a high value, this is 13 point, and the product manager says, look, but I thought this was very simple, not a high value feature, this is 2 points. Now the debate. And the product owner is listening to that debate of why salesperson thinks it is 13 points, why a product manager thinks it is 2 points. And that's a high value insights to come out, why the discrepancy in the value assessment, and that informs the product owner now to figure out how to, maybe it is neither 2 nor 13, it is somewhere in the middle, whatever it is. So that exercise actually doesn't happen in most teams. So doing this exercise, and if you do it independently, this is very important to point. You have to conduct this planning poker and value estimation exercise independently, because otherwise what happens is the business stakeholders, if they know the story is only 2 points, they get biased towards prioritizing it high because it's small. So do it independently. And then once the two teams, the stakeholders have done the value of the story in points, and you have the team done the estimates in story points, now you can just prioritize based on the ratio. Yeah.
Well, from personal experience,
if they're that disparate, if they're assigning points, then one of them probably doesn't, really actually do what they're supposed to be doing, which is the other one.
That may be, but see, what really happens is, let's say the scope of a project has 30 30 stories, right? Certain stories they all agree is high value, but there's those where there's a debate. Now, a salesperson may be talking to customers, they have a certain reason why they think it is a high value 13-point story. While a product manager, for some reason, has been oblivious to that class, segment of market or something, or that class of customer, they just don't think. So by having that conversation allows them to straighten that disconnect out. So that's the point, which is that they're debating at the story level, which is highest value. And once they all agree on the story point, the value points, and now you pair them with the story point, now you can do the ratio. You can say things which are high value, have high story value points, and have low story points and effort. Those are what Vinayak was saying in the previous point, the ships and anchors, those are big ships with small anchors, get them through first, prioritize them higher, those are quick wins. Easy. Things which are actually high value but have high cost, those you question. You say, okay, can we break this thing down into 2 smaller stories or 3 smaller stories? Because they're high cost otherwise. That's a good way to tackle it, and so on. So I think this is a good technique. This is I thought this was a very important takeaway because this conversation actually rarely happens. Most business teams focus on the cost side of the equation, not the value side of the equation, and this gets ignored. So this was a picture from the exercise we did. So in this case, you see we had a exercise of home remodeling stories and how we prioritize it and put it in the story buckets. And just that discussion is very valuable once after you do that. And here are the 2 more data points for evidence why this is important takeaway. This is a page from Jeff Sutherland's session on Scrum at Scale. So the data shows that only 25% of the stories that in any given project scope are actually high value stories customers will actually use. Many of them are what he calls junk stories, low value or dark work, stuff that developers would do stuff because they got time, because the stuff has not been prioritized, the product manager, they got to get stuff done, they do it. So being able to focus on this top 25% is high value. Sometimes in software stuff, not doing stuff is high value because you're adding to technical debt, you're adding to complexity of code and all that. So being that diligent about value estimate is important. And here's another perspective in the keynote from Troy Magenis. He said, look, most of the teams, if you see this, spend a lot more of their time in analytical effort on selection, prioritization, status reporting, and stories. Very little time is actually spent on customer validation of the real stories. And if you want to prioritize that higher, you will deliver much higher value. So keeping these kind of perspectives in mind, the value estimate of stories is a ignored exercise, and using a simple planning poker tile technique is a very simple way to address that shortfall in software development. So that's my takeaway.
So the next one is I'm going to talk about how many of you here, since we are in Capital Factory, how many of you are entrepreneurs doing a startup, right? Good show of hands, right? So, many of you have read the book, The Lean Startup, right? So, Jürgen Apelo is a person who had a keynote address, who delivered a keynote address a couple of years back, maybe 2016. He tried it out, and then he has discovered something more than Lean Startup about a startup. So here are a few tips, if you will, from Jürgen Apelo. So one thing that he said is that it's more than just build, measure, and learn. So Eric Ries talks about, so it's not just build, it's conceptualize. So you have to have that inspiration. Even if it is 1%, you have to have that. Then empathizing. So we'll talk a little bit about that in a later slide. Empathizing is going to the customer understanding and all that. Synthesizing, then getting the solution based on what you have seen there. Hypothesizing that this solution will work in this way to solve this problem. And then you build, measure, and learn. So that is the innovation cycle which is more than lean startup. So this is a good discovery, good learning. The second thing you talked about is hiring is in fact more difficult than raising money. So how do we hire? So he has he said that okay, let's one thing, everyone can work from home. So no office. So hire globally. So wherever you are, you can start working. So that's one thing which guarantees diversity. So that's what he did, and whatever money they saved on the office space and all that, that money was spent on taking them to an exotic location every quarter and building team. No stand-up. So instead of a daily stand-up, they used to have a daily cafe. It starts with 5 minutes of chit-chat, and then you have you go around the table and ask what should we discuss today. So there is a voting, and in that voting, whichever topics gets selected, that topics gets discussed. So that's called lead copy way of doing daily cafe. And there is a step-by-step process of hiring, and candidates who are not suitable are eliminated. Funding, crowdfunding. So what are the advantages of crowdfunding? So many of you have heard of ICOs. People are doing ICOs and doing crowdfunding more and more than going to PE or VC investors. So advantages of crowdfunding. One thing that happens when you have 100 people investing in your startup is that you have 100 advocates talking good about your startup, about your product. So you have them as your feet to the feet. And then going the VC route is an agile, because once you sign up, it's very hard to, you can't take $1 million from a VC and say, okay, I'll keep it till I find an opportunity where you can't wait till the last opportunity moment to spend that money. And so that's hard. So these are the crowdfunding platforms which Union referred to. So seed oils and foundation and investors. So these are some of the crowdfunding platforms. They charge 5 to 10% to allow you to do crowdfunding, but it all works out better than going the VC route. So here are some golden nuggets. Most startups fail because they start scaling without validating. So you have to take enough time. So there has to be a stabilized step. So after you have your first customer or first 2 customers who love your product, think about it. Why they love the product, and ask them. There is more to it. There still might be something that you need to fix. Alright. So then there are 2 steps that we talked about: startup and scale up. Startup step is ideating, concepting, starting, validating, stabilizing. Scale up is whatever you see here, scaling, establishing, and all that. The next thing that we talked about is the new canvas by Ash Maurya. I'll show you the picture. So in this picture, these are the steps that Ash Maurya talks about, going from 1 to 2 to 3 to 4. So you don't have, it looks like waterfall model to me. Going from step 1 to step 2 to step, as if after your problem statement, you are happy that this is the problem you are trying to solve. I mean, there is no way you are going to come back and iterate and change the problem statement. That's not true. So, here's a better way of looking at it, right? So, this is a restructured lean canvas. So, you would be doing step 1 and step 2 in parallel, step 3 in parallel. So, there are multiple of these steps running in parallel. So, and you can go back and forth. So, that's the restructured lean canvas that Jürgen talked about. I think, what do you?
Alright, so next takeaway was this topic of Scrum scaling. So scaling has been a topic around for a while. So one thing you guys been around this Agile community that Agile has become very popular, and I'll cover it. I think one of my other takeaways is that it is now enterprise wide, and larger companies have been adopting Agile across not just across thousands of teams, but also across functions and all that. So there are, if you're familiar, there are at least half a dozen or so scaling frameworks out there. SAFE's Scaled Agile Framework by Dean Leffenwell is the most well-known one for a variety of reasons. Less by another thought leader, Large Scale Scrum is another one, Nexus, so on, and Disciplined Agile by Scott Ambler and all that. So there's six or so. So this is the one which used to be, this is the takeaway from this conference was this particular one by the co-creator of Scrum, Jeff Sutherland. I highly recommend, if you're not familiar with his work, you should look him up. He's one of the, Ken Schwaber and Jeff Sutherland are credited as the co-creators of Scrum as a technique, and he's written many books and all that. So my main takeaway from this conference, from attending this session, was while SAFe is still pretty popular, there are a lot of consultants out there who practice, but it is considered the somewhat heavyweight framework, meaning it is kind of, the flag it gets says that at the bottom level you're doing scrums, but it builds layers of overhead on scaling, which looks more or less like waterfall for classical old school management. So it has all the same gates and all that. So a better model proposed by Jeff Sutherland is what he's calling Scrum at Scale, which is much lighter weight, more natural in terms of, as I covered, scalability wise, much more honest to the Scrum intent of lightweight scaling. So this is a recent coverage. So the left is his. In next few minutes, I'm not going to do justice to describing this framework. So I highly recommend, if you're interested in read up his Scrum Guide, a small book. He's the one who wrote the Scrum Guide, original one. This is Scrum at Scale Guide. And then a few months ago, Harvard Business Review had this Jeff Sutherland's article on Scrum at Scale. That's also a good read. So it's very kind of current topic that he's proposing right now. So his main kind of approach to Scrum at Scale, what he calls Scrum at Scale, is it allows linear scalability. So, and that's the holy grail of scaling. If you can get to linear scalability, both on the operational scalability as well as strategic scalability, then you get somewhere. The SAFe and other models bring too much overhead. It is not at all linear. You will start losing a lot of in overhead. And the key thing he talks about is the role of great product owner. Remember, I showed a chart a little while ago where only 25% of the stories or features are actually used by customers. So the role of product owner as you scale is very important, to prioritize stuff and work on stuff that is indeed has real business value. So in his Scrum at Scale model, that's very important too. So, and I'll show a picture. Let me actually show that picture first. So his framework has these two cycles: a Scrum Master cycle for delivering stuff, this one on the left, and a product owner cycle in a scale when you have thousands of teams, how to coordinate features and all that across those. And that's a very strong product owner cycle you got to run to prioritize stuff. Okay, take it down. This thing to show like this, yeah, this one. So that's important. And then in his scaling Scrum at Scale model, there are three teams essentially: the team of executive action team to remove roadblocks at the high level, and then the enterprise meta Scrum, which is essentially product owner role, and then Scrum of Scrums and Scrum of Scrum of Scrum. So he has a very kind of a organic way to approach Scrum at Scale. So that was the main kind of a takeaway. Let me see if there's anything else I want to cover in this video. Yeah, so that's pretty much it on Scrum at Scale.
So I love this company. Intuit is QuickBooks company, and Ian Nathan from Intuit, he talked about their process of doing experimentation. So here's a short one picture of the process. So first step is deep customer empathy. So deep empathy means actually you visit the customer, observe and take notes and propose them. So they have hilarious stories. They land up in a small dining table with a few people with a whole television crew taking interviews and all that. So hints, be a dummy, So don't have to act smart. You have to make the other person talk. Ask questions, ask clarifications, actively listen, don't suggest, don't judge. So that's the way to empathize, and that's when the bulb will go on. Go broad, generate many ideas. So, actually we did an exercise in that room. Ian Maple asked us to generate ideas, and he gave us 2 minutes. And in a room of about 50 people, he generated 300 ideas in 2 minutes. So they say ideas dime a dozen. It's literally true. You can go broad very easily. You can generate a lot of ideas, right? So go broad, and then how do you narrow? You do a 2x2 narrowing by creating grids with orthogonal word pairs. So such as speed and accuracy. So high speed, low speed, high accuracy, low accuracy. So you draw a quadrant. On the right hand top quadrant is what you will select. Similarly, cost and innovative. More innovative, lower cost is what you will select. Simple and versatile. Simpler and more versatile is what you will select. Then put your ideas in the grid, and then you will be able to select. So that's how they go broad, go narrow. So that's how ideas are selected for doing further experimentation. The second thing was, Jenny from Jenny Wagner. She talked about A/B tests. So the big takeaway from A/B testing is very often it happens that you run a test. After that, things don't go exactly as expected, but you make a change and that seems to work. Then you have a meeting. In that meeting, question is asked whether this worked or not. And then someone says it worked pretty well. It would have worked better if it hadn't rained. It rained on that particular Sunday. If it had rained, definitely you would have got 25% more sales on that day. So how do you neutralize external factors such as you have a promotion running, or you have weather, or you have news and PR, which is beyond your control, right? So you do an A/B test. So the good part about A/B test is that you have an A cohort and a B cohort running in parallel at the same time, right? So what happens is it's completely neutralized. If weather is bad for A, weather is bad for B as well, right? So that is how external variables that are likely to impact can be. So you don't have to redo the test because there was an external variable that impacted the test. Similarly, bugs. Very often you get bugs, right? They say, hey, we started the test, but there was a bug. So in which case, you must restart or redo the whole test. Not really necessary if you study the bug in detail, and if that bug is going to impact your A cohort and B cohort equally. Both have the same bug, so you will still have good enough information. So that's the advantage of running A/B tests. In the first pipeline that I showed, data can be imprecise. So that's another thing that we discussed in this session by Jenny. They actually did that, and they were very happy. So human mind is such that if you get good news, you tend to believe it. So they got 25% increase in the first 3 days of running the new way of doing things, and they immediately believed it, and they actually had a celebration. But when they actually went back to the data, they found that they had double counted the number of customers in it. So you don't have to. So the point that is, you have to actually do a good quality control and check your data. Lastly, decide what is good enough to favor A or B. Right? Good may not be good enough. So A is marginally better, may not. Hemant would be talking about the red field experiment shortly. So you have randomness that is there in data. So marginally better is not. It's not going to prove the point. So it has to be good enough for you to take that decision. What do you?
The next point, which of course is like referred to that we experiment, is this myth of 10x developers. So I've been around software industry, and I think many of you have been for multiple decades. And this has been a belief in software industry, notion of a good performing software developer. Sometimes I've heard as much as 40x more productive than an average software developer. And companies in the company that I work with, they've had this system with Microsoft it for a while, force ranking developers every quarter. Force ranking 1 through 10 and bottom 20%. We let them go because they believe that there is something such thing as. So the important takeaway here is you got to be careful. Software development. Think of your software development team, overall team as a system, right? And that's, you got to think of the system's output rather than individual's output, and try to tune and optimize for the system overall output rather than try to bank on a rock star or a rocket science one developer and pin your hopes on that. So that's important takeaway. So we did an experiment what I referred to as a red bead experiment, where essentially it illustrates the point that there is inherent statistical. If you take a sample of from a bucket of red and white beads, if you take a handful of them, you always have certain number of red beads within a range, right? And if you think of red beads as defects and white beads as working functionality in software, to strive for zero defects, which is unrealistic. I mean, there are a certain number of defects you can have so long as you have control bands. Within a control band, if you're getting within that, no point trying to strive to get to an unrealistic number. Now, if you're out of those bands, control bands, then of course there is some correction required. So that was the kind of a key. So important point is that some teams do individual performance rewards. This illustration kind of drives the point home. This experiment or whatever it was that this guy showed the chart of flight quality for pilot who had a higher flight quality, give them a praise, and you observe that their performance declines in the next flight. And those pilots who had poor flight quality, and you criticize them, and their performance improves. But when you look carefully at the data, essentially it's a regression to the mean. So it gives someone an impression, a manager an impression that you're doing individual performance rewards and penalties is actually working. Most of it is noise. So to recognize the reality and work at the system level and recognize the fact that you're just having a big engine and a rickety chassis, not going to get you bought. So work on the system, not individual components, and try to maximize it. So that's a big takeaway because we often struggle with this topic of individual performance reward and individual performance in teams. Think of software. And this is very important in Agile to focus on when I covered metrics that talked before also. Focus on team metrics. That's very important.
So last time, I don't know how many of you have present, we talked about chaos monkey. Chaos monkey is nothing but way of randomly testing. Chaos monkey randomly switches off servers, right? And sees what is the impact. So it's a testing tool that Netflix. And now this time we saw the entire army of monkeys, singing army. So it's not just switching off one server, but chaos kills random instances. Chaos gorilla kills entire zones, right? You know a zone in AWS or in chaos storm kills entire regions. And latency degrades the network and injects faults in the network. Conformity looks for outliers. So there are some monkeys that are fixing defects also. When you look for outliers, circus kills and launches instances. So it will not only kill, it will also launch new instances. Doctor will fix unhealthy resources. Janitor, howler, and security. So janitor will clean up stuff. Howler will just tell that this is happening, that is happening. So this is an entire simian army, and that is what we call chaos engineering today. So it's a discipline by itself to make sure that your distributed applications spending tens of thousands of dollars a month that you're spending on AWS, that it is healthy and it is kept that way. So what is chaos engineering? Chaos engineering is like setting up, actually it's a scientific experiment where you have a hypothesis that, given, let's say, a situation such as a power outage, or given a situation such as a particular program being infected by a virus, what will happen? So you are actually simulating that situation and playing it out by using this. So have a real world event. So the way I described it. do continuous experimentation. So you need automation for that, and it has to see what final impact on business is. So what is it has to run in production. So it's not something that you do on test environment. You do it in production and see what is the actual impact it has on the number of users. Of course, you have to limit your blast radius. You can't go this civilian army and go and destroy your production environment in all regions, all zones, everywhere, right? So you have to limit your blast radius, make it as real as possible. Start by testing the weakest link. So you take value stream and see what is the weakest link in that. Don't forget to test people. So very often you have. So I don't know how many of you have read the Phoenix Project. The book Phoenix Project talks about a character called Brent. So Brent is having this uncanny knack of shutting down every server that he touches for whatever reason. So is there a Brent in your team? So people use value stream and expect the unexpected. For example, they talked about power outage. And power outage not only results in shutting down the servers, but it also results in, if the traffic signals are not working, people won't come to the office only. There will be delayed. So there are so many other side effects that these things are. So expect the unexpected. And finally, tools. There are too many tools that you have. So there are so many dependencies. So the number of dependencies, the more the number of dependencies, the more the number of have the chance of failure. So it is 1 to the 1 divided 2 to the power of n. N is being the number of dependencies. That's exponentially it increases the chance of failure. So remember that. That was my last takeaway. Over to you, Hema.
Right, so before we go through the final few takeaways, I think Jill wanted to make an announcement. Jill. Need a mic?
We just want to thank you all so much for coming out. That we had a little bit of a raffle that nobody knew about. And we randomly drew names from everybody who's here. Oh, I left one back there. So I have a few winners. So Mike Nelson, is he still here? Yes. Mike, not here? No? Okay. Tony Portman? Yay! It's actually, it's really cool. Catherine or Julie, could you just grab my water bottle to show what it is? It's a Centersip water bottle, but it's also Bluetooth to your phone. And so it's a speaker, and it's a really good speaker. I had it at the lake the other day. It's got Bluetooth. So the top of it is speaker. Yeah. And then Philip Blonde. Yay. Enjoy. And then Carl Ott is where. There you go. And Sharon Neeson. There you go. Thank you. And then last we have Brenda Everman. Yay! Thank you. And now for the final takeaways.
Thank you, Jill. So let's get on to the final home stretch now. So I have this final takeaway on metrics, and then we'll cover a few straggling ones that didn't warrant a page by itself, and I will have a few add-ons. Okay, we do that as normal practice. Okay, so the final one was, I said that there was a track this year on full track on Agile metrics and data and all that. So this is a topic that we struggle with a lot with when we work with our client. What are the right metrics to use and all that? So there were a number of sessions. There were 3 sessions I ended up attending that I'm crediting these to. One was this whole discussion on outcome versus output. In medical industry, in healthcare, a lot of you are familiar, people talk about outcomes. It's a more important way to measure impact, and in software, now we're talking about outcomes versus output metrics. So there was one session, a lot of discussion on that. Second was this topic of goal question, the GQM approach to Agile by John Taylor. That's an interesting one to look into. And then third was the same guy who did a statistically rigorous analysis of all the 10,000 team data and all that. So he, in collaboration with some others, have come up with this model, outcome, decision, insight, measure framework for model. So the net essentially, if you ask me, of the metrics, this is, I'm going to give you my summarized kind of takeaway after you listen to all this stuff and you practice Agile, is this, that you should use essentially, this is from the Larry's and Troy Magen's work, 4 categories of metrics. So the first category, they're not in particular order, so the order is not important, is quality. So pick a metric which indicates quality of work, right? Whether it is defect density, most popular one actually is what is called escape defects. That's a good popular one. It's the defect that your customers found but escaped your QA process or your process. That's a good metric. So pick one of the quality metrics. Second, pick a productivity, which is how much got done. Whether you use the velocity, a number of stories that got done per month, per sprint, doesn't matter. Some unit of productivity for the team is delivered. Third, or pick a metric that is responsiveness. How quickly are you delivering from usually a cycle time, which is when the time a story is ready in the backlog, prioritized by the product owner, by the time it gets to production, where a customer is actually using it. If it takes you 2 weeks, you're very responsive. If it takes you 2 years, you're obviously not very responsive, right? So a responsiveness metric. And then fourth is the predictability metric, which is how predictable is your team's performance. If they commit to saying 9 stories a sprint and they deliver by God 9 stories a sprint, you can depend on them. On the other hand, if they say 9 stories one sprint and they do 2 stories in the next sprint and then do 7 stories, you really can't bank on the predictability. So pick one metric from each of these 4 categories and then look at the trend. That's very important. Don't look at a static snapshot. Look at a timeline, whether it is recent monthly for the recent 12 months or something like that, and have one from each. So that's the key thing. And here's the sample examples of one dashboard with each of these. So in this case, they're using a quality metric, I think of defect density, a responsive metric, and doing a trend. So if you have this kind of a dashboard, then gaming doesn't happen because you can always improve one metric at the cost of other. Now, in some cases, it makes sense. So it is good for you if quality is an issue and you want to focus on quality and improve that. Yeah, maybe it will give you take a hit on productivity. But that's a known trade-off as a manager, as a business leader you may make. But look at a metric over time period. And here's another one. This one I took actually not from Agile. This is something I've been looking at. This I've given a link to this one. This is another one. The interesting thing about this one is this uses cycle time, escape defects, plan to done ratio, which is essentially a predictability metric for a team. But it also has a happiness metric for a team, which is the other ones ignored, which is also important to keep in mind for sustainable pace of software development. Okay. So net advice on metrics is this from Troy Magennis, which I thought was very helpful. Look for trends, not static numbers. So over time, look for team metrics, not individual. So I talked about 10x method, 10x developer, and all that. Look for multiple, not a single metric. So if you have 4 of these balanced metrics, then you would do a much better job of making the right decision. And account for your context. Whatever context you are in, early stage company versus a big company with stable clients and quality being a big concern and all that. So those are the main takeaways that we went through 1 through 12. Now Vinayak and I will take turns on just quick hits of things that stood out to us but didn't warrant a page by themselves as a takeaway. So what do you think?
Thanks, Hemant. So my sound bites that didn't warrant a page. So Don Bernardson was quoted. He said that we may ignore economics, but economics won't ignore you. The second was Ahmad Norman. He's an Egyptian. They did an experiment where mock programming is when 5 people are sitting together, 5 developers, and they develop in a mock using 1 keyboard, 1 mouse. And then you compare their productivity with 5 working solo in their respective cubicles. Surprisingly, the outcome of that experiment was the productivity was equal. Whether 5 work solo or 5 work together. That was interesting. Share your forecast so frequently that clients will stop asking when is the release date. A fool with a tool is still a fool. Unintentional experiments happen. So, it's time. It's time to go home. Unintentional experiments happen. Keep track of things even if there is no immediate use. So you get so much data you don't even know. You might find it useful later. So instead of instrumenting an experiment every time you want to find out something, use what you have. So experiments are happening all the time. Alright? So you will find sound bites.
So I had two soundbite level takeaways. So one was this topic of business agility. I think I may have referred to this. So this was they had a set up a lab of sorts this session. They didn't have this topic last year. It was much more prominent this year. And the idea of business agility is much more of a topic this year is an enterprise-wide agility, not just in software development. And I think last year I covered one takeaway using agile practices in marketing, in finance, and HR and all that. Because now we're talking about executive level, the Scrum at scale that I talked about, premises in the business agility, executive, everybody is running Scrum as agile is the way of running the company. The business agility, the way defined in this, business agility is the measurement of the company's ability to identify and capture and meet with the market opportunity. So agile is now seen as an operating system at the business level, and that's what the HBR requirement is becoming now. Second takeaway was an interesting session, a specific session by a team from Accenture, where they're using AI to have essentially a CV-like AI assistant Scrum Master. So the idea is you have data already in your Rally or ALM system, you have all the data. So instead of depending on Scrum Master to pick up and ask you those questions or roadblocks and all that, Scrum Master can be a lot more effective if they're assisted by AI, given that they have access, AI will have access to data. They're built tool actually. They built a tool called My Wizard, and they've written a paper on it, and they're practicing it for the last 3 years or so, and it makes their Scrum Master not more efficient. Therefore, there was some merit in this idea of leveraging the application lifecycle management to the data to be more smart Scrum Master than the conventional Scrum Master. So that's pretty much it for our takeaways. We'll hang around for a little longer, answer any questions you guys have on any of these topics or topics related to the challenge of agile software development. And there are more food, I think, and drinks. So thanks for coming, guys.
Sorry,